You aren't collapsing. Like, you are still showing up to work every day, you're hitting your targets, you're handling your responsibilities, and you probably look incredibly successful to everyone around you. But beneath all of that high-level functioning, there is this strange invisible exhaustion.
Yeah, it's a very real thing.
Right. It isn't just a lack of sleep. It feels more like your vitality is slowly leaking out of a puncture in your battery. A puncture you just can't quite locate, no matter how much you optimize your routine.
It is a profound modern weariness. We aren't talking about the physical exhaustion of manual labor here. This is the exhaustion of chronic, low-grade internal friction. You are operating, yes, but you're operating on fumes, dragging a massive psychological weight that you can't even see.
And today, we are going to find that puncture. We're pulling from a really fascinating text titled From Anxiety and Internal Friction to Inner Clarity. And this wasn't written for people who are totally falling apart. It was written specifically for high-pressure, high-functioning individuals, people just like you who are navigating the incredibly unpredictable landscape of the AI era.
Which is pretty much everyone right now.
Exactly. So let's set the stakes right out of the gate here. The mission of this deep dive is not to give you more productivity hacks. We are not going to tell you to wake up at 4 a.m., take an ice bath, and just push through the pain.
Please don't do that.
Right. Instead, our goal is to help you understand the actual mechanics of why your current lifestyle is draining you and how to map a way out without turning self-improvement into just another exhausting item on your to-do list. Okay, let's unpack this. Where do we even begin diagnosing an exhaustion that we can't see?
Well, we begin by completely shifting the blame. When high achievers feel that vitality leak, their immediate default setting is self-blame. The inner monologue goes something like, I'm just not resilient enough. I'm failing to manage my stress. I need a better morning routine. But the source text argues something far more profound. Your pain is not a personal failure. It is a programmatic product.
A programmatic product?
Yeah.
That sounds incredibly deliberate, almost like software terminology.
That framing is highly intentional. Think about a houseplant. If you take a plant that thrives in sunlight and place it in a dark, windowless room with terrible air quality and it begins to wilt, you don't look at the plant and say, wow, this plant has a really weak mindset. It needs to be more resilient.
Right, you'd sound crazy.
Exactly. You recognize immediately that the environment is fundamentally hostile to its biology. Humans operate the exact same way. We are running deeply ingrained societal and structural programs that are actively hostile to our psychological biology.
And the text outlines 5 of these major societal programs. But rather than just listing them out, let's look at how they actually work together to drain us. Because to me, it seems like the performance program is the core virus here, right?
Yeah.
Especially for our listeners.
The performance program is absolutely the engine of this modern exhaustion. It operates on a relentless, undeniable logic that your inherent value as a human being is exactly equal to your economic or professional output.
Wow.
Yeah. If you are producing, you matter. If you rest, you're worthless. But that program doesn't exist in a vacuum. It heavily infects the competition program, which is the societal default belief that you must always be advancing. Standing still isn't just pausing. Standing still means you are actively falling behind.
And then you carry that mindset home with you. It mutates into what the text calls the relationship program. You start treating your partner or your friends like coworkers you have to manage or outperform.
Right. Connection gets twisted into this anxious calculation of who is giving more or who holds the power.
And it all starts so early, doesn't it?
That is the tragedy of it. The origins of this usually trace back to the family program from childhood, where many high achievers were unconsciously taught that love and safety are conditional on performance. If you bring home the A+, you are celebrated. If you struggle, you are a burden.
Yeah, that hits close to home for a lot of people.
And now we have the ultimate accelerant poured on top of all of this, the information program. We are subjected to algorithmically driven noise designed specifically to hijack our attention and artificially inflate our anxiety by forcing us to compare our mundane reality to everyone else's highlight reels.
I love a good analogy, and when you describe these programs operating together, it feels exactly like having a background app running on a smartphone. You know that scenario where your phone is just sitting on the table, the screen is totally black, and it looks like it's resting?
Yes, but it's not.
No, exactly. Underneath, there's some poorly coded, bloated app silently tracking your GPS, constantly pinging the server, refreshing data, and draining your battery to 0. Then you pick up the phone to do something you actually want to do, like live your real life, and you wonder why you only have 5% battery left.
That is the perfect visualization of internal friction. You are exhausted because your psychological system is running all of those background apps simultaneously 24 hours a day. And the author highlights something crucial here. The AI era has acted as a massive system-wide shock to this already overloaded processor.
I really want to dig into that because earlier you said this text was specifically for the AI era. For decades, technology has been changing the workplace. I mean, we survived the internet, we survived smartphones. Why is AI fundamentally different when it comes to this internal exhaustion?
Because AI didn't just automate tasks, it broke a fundamental psychological contract. For the last few decades, the implicit bargain of the performance and competition programs was basically this: if I work incredibly hard, if I sacrifice my 20s, and I master this highly specific, difficult skill, I am guaranteed a stable identity.
Right, like whether that's coding or graphic design, copywriting, whatever.
Exactly, or financial analysis. The promise was you get a predictable future. Your value was locked in.
So you built your entire sense of self around being, the best coder or the fastest analyst.
Precisely. And the AI era just shattered that bargain overnight. Suddenly, a machine can do in 30 seconds what you tied your entire self-worth to mastering. That doesn't just threaten your paycheck, it triggers an existential panic.
Right.
Rapid industry changes mean that people who tie their internal stability to external mastery are suddenly standing on quicksand.
Wow.
Yeah, the performance program in their brain suddenly has no ground to stand on, and the anxiety just skyrockets.
I hear that, but I have to push back a little here. If we sit here and blame all these external programs, if we say, it's my family's fault, it's the economy's fault, it's society's fault, and now it's AI's fault, aren't we just playing the victim? Isn't that just a convenient way to refuse to take responsibility for our own lives?
What's fascinating here is the crucial difference between shifting blame to avoid action and recognizing a program so you can actually dismantle it. Playing the victim is a passive state. It means saying, the system is rigged, therefore I am helpless and I don't have to change.
Okay, so what's the alternative?
Recognizing the program is a highly active state. It means saying, I see the automated loop that society installed in my brain. Now that I can see the code, I can consciously choose to rewrite it, rather than blindly letting it run my life. It is actually the ultimate act of taking responsibility because you are finally wresting the steering wheel away from the autopilot.
That distinction changes everything. We aren't making excuses for our exhaustion. We are diagnosing the malware. So, having identified these massive external programs, performance, competition, information, we have to look at how they take up residence inside the mind. Because society is out there, but the exhaustion is happening in here.
Exactly.
The text talks about how these external pressures mutate into automated internal circuits, which generate what it bluntly calls mental garbage.
The external pressure has to go somewhere, so it gets internalized into highly specific automated circuits. The text breaks down several, but the ones that plague high achievers the most are fear, comparison, control, and people-pleasing.
Let's talk about the control circuit. That one feels very relevant when everything is shifting.
The control circuit is the frantic attempt to manage completely uncontrollable outcomes because you are terrified of uncertainty. It's the manager who can't delegate a simple email because they need to control the exact phrasing. There's also perfectionism, which the text clarifies is rarely about actually having high standards.
Oh, really? Then what is it?
True perfectionism is almost always an absolute, paralyzing inability to tolerate the feeling of being not good enough.
That is, wow. But the circuit I really want to zoom in on, because it completely blew my mind, is what the source calls the proving circuit. Think about a standard Tuesday morning. You have a task to do at work. Let's say you just have to put together a basic 5-slide presentation for a routine meeting. Just doing the actual mechanics of that task requires, let's say, 1 unit of your energy. It should take 20 minutes. But if you are doing that task while simultaneously running the proving circuit,
The math completely changes.
it explodes because now you aren't just making slides. You are terrified of looking stupid in front of your boss. You are trying to prove you still deserve your job in the age of AI. You are trying to subtly outshine a rival on the team. Suddenly, that mental theater requires 4 extra units of energy.
It's exhausting.
We were spending 5 units of energy on a 1-unit task, and the task takes 3 hours instead of 20 minutes. No wonder you have a headache by noon.
You are carrying a massive, invisible, high-stakes theater production around with you every single time you send a Slack message or sit in a Zoom room. And as this internal friction grinds away, you accumulate that mental garbage you mentioned earlier. The author categorizes it into 4 types. There is negative garbage, like acute fear and chronic simmering anger.
Right.
There is passive garbage, which is that heavy, dragging pessimism and sense of meaninglessness, the feeling of what's the point of any of this. There's information garbage, which is just the sheer cognitive overload of the digital age.
And the text also mentions a fourth type, malicious garbage. And I have to interrupt here because that word sounds incredibly harsh. When I hear malicious, I think of cartoon villainy or someone actively trying to destroy their coworkers. I don't think the high achievers listening to this view themselves as malicious.
It sounds aggressive, but it's much more subtle and insidious than cartoon villainy. In this context, malicious garbage often manifests as control disguised as care.
Wow. Control disguised as care.
Yes. It's when you micromanage a team member or even a spouse under the guise of just helping them out or wanting it to be perfect for them, when in reality you are just soothing your own profound anxiety. You are projecting your own fear of failure onto them and restricting their autonomy to make yourself feel safe. It's malicious not because you are evil, but because it actively harms the relationship to feed your own internal circuit.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. When I look at that proving circuit, the 5 units of energy for a 1-unit task, I have to ask on behalf of our listeners, isn't the desire to prove yourself basically just the definition of ambition? I mean, we live in a hyper-competitive world. If I strip away my need to prove that I'm valuable, won't I just lose my edge? Won't I just become lazy, complacent, and ultimately obsolete?
It is incredibly common to confuse the two, but the text makes a brilliant, piercing distinction here. Proving yourself is a bottomless pit. Think about the mechanics of it. If you successfully prove yourself today and get the applause, what happens tomorrow?
You have to do it again.
The system demands you prove yourself again. The baseline just resets.
Yeah.
It is an engine fueled entirely by fear of being exposed, fear of falling behind. Therefore, proving is always defensive. It makes your worldview narrow, contracted, and tight.
And genuine ambition, what does that look like?
Genuine ambition is fueled by a desire to create, to experience, to solve a fascinating problem, or to build something meaningful. Ambition feels expansive. When you are driven by creation, a failure is just data you learn from it and adjust. When you are driven by proving, a failure is an indictment of your soul. If you drop the desperate need to prove, you don't become lazy. You actually free up those 4 extra units of wasted energy to do truly creative, high-level, innovative work.
Okay, the diagnosis is crystal clear.
Yeah.
We have these massive external programs, performance, information, competition, driving internal automated circuits like proving and control. This generates a mountain of mental garbage, and that is what drains our batteries.
Exactly.
The million-dollar question now is, how do we actually clean it up? The text introduces a concept called purification, which, I'm not going to lie, sounds a bit woo-woo. It sounds like you're going to tell me to quit my job, move to the mountains, and meditate in a cave for 5 years.
It definitely carries that mystical connotation, but the author is fiercely practical about this. The true meaning of purification in this context does not mean becoming some perfect, transcendent, emotionless saint who never feels stress. Purification simply means one thing: stop feeding the components that cause you pain. That is the entire goal. And the text offers a very grounded 3-step intervention to do this.
Let's break down those 3 steps, because this is where the rubber meets the road.
Step 1 is see, which means to identify. When you get triggered by something, you don't overanalyze it, you don't dive into your childhood trauma, and most importantly, you don't judge yourself for it. You just calmly acknowledge the circuit. You say to yourself, my relationship anxiety circuit just activated, or there goes the proving circuit. By naming it, you create a tiny vital gap between you and the circuit.
Step 2 is stop, meaning stop feeding it. But I can already hear our listeners groaning at the phrase, just stop feeding it. If you're a high achiever, your brain is a runaway train of constant problem solving. Telling an overthinker to just stop feels like telling a shark to stop swimming. How do we practically bypass that massive intellectual resistance?
By redefining what stopping looks like, stopping does not mean you force your brain to go blank. It means you don't take the next physical action the circuit is demanding. Let's say you get a vague, passive-aggressive Slack message from a colleague. The anxiety circuit fires. It demands that you immediately draft a defensive 5-paragraph reply, or that you spend the next hour doom scrolling to numb the spike in your heart rate.
We've all been there.
Stopping simply means you don't type the message, you don't open the social media app, you allow the physical feeling of anxiety to exist in your chest, but you refuse to give it the behavioral calories it needs to grow.
And then step 3 is retrieve or replace.
Yes. You retrieve your scattered, frantic attention and bring it back to the cold, hard, present facts. You ask yourself, what is actually happening right now in physical reality, stripped of my catastrophic narrative?
So in the Slack message scenario,
The fact is, a colleague sent 12 words on a screen. That is the only thing happening in reality. The narrative that they hate you, that you are going to be fired, and that your career is over, that is the circuit running wild. You retrieve your focus back to the 12 words.
I love this three-step process. It completely reminds me of the mechanics of driving a car on an icy road. When you are driving and you hit a patch of black ice, which is the trigger, the Slack message, your absolute first instinct is to slam your foot on the brakes.
Right.
You panic and you want to violently force the car to stop moving. But any driving instructor will tell you that slamming the brakes is exactly what locks the wheels and makes you spin out into a ditch.
This raises an important question, actually, because that analogy highlights the exact trap most people fall into with self-improvement. People constantly confuse stopping with violently suppressing their feelings. They slam the psychological brakes.
Right. They think, I'm a senior executive, I shouldn't be anxious about an email, so they wage a mental war against their own anxiety. They judge themselves for feeling it. But slamming the brakes, suppressing the emotion, just creates massive internal friction. The see and stop steps are like taking your foot off the gas pedal. You don't slam the brakes, you just stop accelerating.
Exactly.
You let the anxiety roll through your system without feeding it new catastrophic thoughts. And then retrieve is simply steering gently into the skid, focusing on the facts, until your tires finally find traction on the pavement again.
That is exactly the mechanism. Just take your foot off the gas, let the momentum naturally bleed out.
It is such a relief to realize you don't have to fight the anxiety, you just have to starve it. But here is the next reality we have to face. You can't just empty a room and expect it to magically stay clean forever. Nature abhors a vacuum. Once we start starving these negative circuits of their fuel, what happens to all that newly freed up space in our minds?
This is where we move into the proactive phase of the text planting the light. If you successfully starve your comparison circuit, you might actually feel a strange sense of emptiness or boredom because that anxious comparison was your primary fuel source for years. You have to deliberately cultivate new qualities to fill that void. The text suggests planting things like authenticity, tranquility, gratitude, boundaries, and a concept called looseness.
Looseness, I really like that word. It implies relaxing your white-knuckled grip on how you think life is supposed to go.
It's a reduction in internal tension. And alongside looseness, planting boundaries is vital. High achievers often confuse boundaries with building walls to keep people out. But true boundaries are what allow you to deeply engage with your work and love your family without utterly exhausting yourself. Boundaries are the container that holds the looseness.
Let's be brutally realistic for a second, though. I know our listeners. They hold themselves to incredibly high, sometimes punishing standards. If they try this stop, retrieve process tomorrow morning and they fail, let's say they get triggered in a meeting, they totally spiral into that proving circuit and they spend an hour arguing a pointless detail. How do they stop the inevitable second wave of shame?
That's the hardest part.
Right? Because there is an inner critic waiting to say, you listened to an entire deep dive on this, you know exactly how the circuits work, and you still messed up. You are failing at self-improvement.
That second wave of shame is almost always more damaging than the initial trigger. It burns twice as much energy. If we pull back and connect this to the bigger picture of human growth, the text explicitly warns us to expect what it calls the swing back. Healing is never, ever linear. A relapse into an old program is not a failure.
Okay, so how should we view it?
The author uses a beautiful metaphor. A relapse is simply a loosening of the soil, or a receding tide that reveals deeper roots that you are finally strong enough to look at.
So how do we handle that swing back in the heat of the moment, when the shame wave hits?
The author provides a highly literal, practical cue card exercise for this exact moment. When you catch yourself spiraling and the shame hits, you are instructed to tell yourself out loud if you have to, I am not failing. I am just caught in an old program. My goal right now isn't perfect recovery. It is just to not expand the damage.
Just to not expand the damage. That is incredibly profound. It lowers the bar from perfect enlightenment to just damage control. It is essentially the realization that your personal growth should not become a new KPI. We cannot turn self-improvement into a new knife that we use to attack ourselves.
Well said.
The ultimate overarching takeaway from the final chapter of this text is that this process is not a war against yourself.
The moment you turn your psychological well-being into a competition with yourself, you have unknowingly reactivated the performance and competition programs. You have just taken the old malware and hidden it inside a new spiritual-sounding wrapper. Purification is not about conquering your mind. It is about gently, patiently unhooking yourself from a machine that was never designed with your well-being in mind. You hold the power to exit the automated loop because the programs only run as long as you unknowingly provide the electricity.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? Let's bring all these threads together. If you are feeling that deep, unexplainable exhaustion, it means you are not broken, you are not weak, and you do not lack resilience. You are simply running outdated, automated programs that are siphoning your energy in the background.
Exactly.
By learning to see those circuits without judgment, by stopping the feed without violently slamming on the brakes, and by replacing that frantic energy with boundaries and a sense of looseness, you can finally stop the internal friction. But most importantly, you have to drop the weapon you've been using against yourself. You have to stop making your own healing a competitive sport.
Absolutely.
I want to leave you with a final thought to really mull over today. Think about the world we're living in right now, especially with AI pushing productivity, efficiency, and optimization to absolute dizzying heights. We are constantly bombarded with the message that we have to endlessly optimize our minds and bodies just to keep up, just to remain relevant in the economy.
It never stops.
Right. But what if, in a hyper-productive, relentlessly measuring world, the ultimate act of rebellion isn't to learn a new coding language or to perfectly optimize your sleep protocol? What if the most radical, powerful thing you can do today is to simply grant yourself the permission to be entirely useless for just a few minutes?
I love that.
To just sit there on your couch, not improving, not producing, not proving your worth to anyone without apologizing to society, to your boss, or most importantly to yourself.
That is where the real power lies. Reclaiming your inherent right to simply exist, independent of your output.
Because if you can do that, if you can just be useless for 5 minutes, you just might find the puncture. You might just figure out how to stop the vitality from leaking out of your battery once and for all. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Take a breath, step out of the program, and we will catch you next time.